This episode of the Device Talks weekly podcast is brought to you by Device Talks Tuesdays. Join us this Tuesday at 4 p.m. We'll have a conversation about outsourcing, whether it works, and how it can work for you. Our sponsor is Sertronics, and it promises to be a great conversation. For more information, go to devicetalks.com. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
This is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks weekly podcast. Welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening, great to have you here. We have a great episode coming up. A little later in the show, I'm going to speak with Mike Coyle, the CEO of iRhythm. iRhythm has made some news recently, and Mike came aboard as CEO earlier this year. We talked about that transition. We talked about how iRhythm is handling some recent challenges in reimbursement. It's a really great conversation. Before that, we're going to introduce something new. I'm just going to say that. We'll introduce it later in the program, but I know you'll enjoy it, and it's a great addition to the Device Talks universe. But now, without any further delay, it's time to bring in my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device. Chris Newmarker. Chris, you're smoking like 2 cigarettes and drinking 3 cups of coffee. Chris, is it earnings week this week?
Man, you are well, not the cigarettes. You know, I've been off cigarettes for 20 years, but it is earnings week. It is earnings week for sure. And yes, I am drinking a lot of coffee. Like,
how is earnings week going?
I made sure to clean the coffee maker, and I got new make sure like we had fresh coffee so we could like really brew a good pot, because the earnings reports are rolling out this week.
I could see you on Sunday night. You've got everything in a row. You got all your filters lined up. You've got the coffee pot clean. You've got a new bag of coffee, and you're just like push go on Monday morning.
Even changed the charcoal filter because it's a fancy coffee pot we got at Costco. So
La-di-da, as my dad would used to say.
Charcoal filter.
All right. We're going to hit upon the Newmarkers newsmakers in a moment, but any takeaways from earnings, or is it still a little early in the earnings game to give us a report?
Well, we can talk a little bit more about it. We actually have an earnings report in the Newmarkers newsmakers, but really, a lot of the earnings are better than expected. The U.S., we got set back with the pandemic in January and February, even with that previous wave. But it looks like the procedure volume was okay for the device companies. So I think it looks like there's a lot of reason to be optimistic this year. It's maybe like hospitals have gotten it under control, that they can kind of do the things that they did normally at the same time they're dealing with this terrible pandemic.
We'll check in every week on the podcast on how the earnings are doing, but let's now roll into this week's Newmarkers newsmakers.
So number 5 on the list, we've got a roundup of the 10 largest orthopedic device companies in the world. It ran in full on our sister site, Medical Design Outsourcing. It's by yours truly.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and what I did was I went through the annual reports of the world's largest medical device companies, and I guess kind of not too much of a surprise, but they really took a hit last year. If you're talking about elective procedures, knee replacements, hip replacements, those are near the top of the list. And a lot of them saw double-digit percentage declines in revenue last year. Interestingly enough, though, one of the big exceptions to the rule was Stryker. They were only down 3% last year. So, that's actually quite an accomplishment for Stryker. Another interesting thing was I talked to a lot of analysts about these results, and one takeaway was that Zimmer Biomet, double-digit declines in revenue last year, but they're doing a lot. They're really up in the competition, so it's going to be neat to see how they come out of this pandemic. Because they're coming out with the first smart knee implant later this year. They kind of packaged together all their robotic and digital surgery stuff in this new ZB Edge package, and they're spinning off their dental and spine business too, to kind of really focus on those core ortho areas that they've got. So, it should be neat to see where things go with them. We'll have some more competition in the space among the big companies.
Yeah, this is a great job, great list. I clicked through them. I was surprised at some of the ranks and placements, and I thought the revenue changes were very interesting. And you're right about Stryker. It's I don't know if it's the success they had in placing Makos or what, but
I think Mako is a big reason.
Yeah, they seem to weather the storm better than a lot of them. So, but a few other strong performers. So it's definitely a list people should take a look at.
Yeah, sounds good. So
bring us to number 4, Chris Newmarker.
Number 4 on the list ran in full on pharmaceutical processing world, and this was like FDA releasing a scathing inspection report about the Emergent Biosolutions plant in Baltimore. This was the plant we were all hoping was going to make a ton of J&J and AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yeah, this is outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a laundry list of problems that the inspectors, found. Just a lot of things that need to get fixed over there. In the meantime, they already dumped 15 million doses of J&J vaccine. There was a lot of more being held, and FDA said they were going to inspect it, to see if they can release that. So hopefully we'll get some J&J vaccine out there that can get into people's arms. And in the meantime, the CDC and the FDA have been, having a pause in J&J vaccine while they look at, the really rare blood clotting issues around it. Though it doesn't look like there've been that many more cases. So we may lift it. So that could be. I
got my J&J jab. I'm perfectly happy with it. I'm feeling good. But I'm not a big my tax dollars guy. But the fact that HHS committed over $600 million to Emergent last year to be ready for this, and they've got all these problems. It's just, I don't know if it all got to the company, if it was just committed to the company, but it's just outrageous.
I recall reading that actually, it goes back, it goes all the way back to the Obama administration. Right. That they actually lined them up to
have them ready to go.
If we need a vaccine because we've got a pandemic, the plant, the inspection report's talking about it, the plant wasn't big enough. They were talking about problems with decontamination because paint was peeling. There was the stuff about the people in the warehouse dragging barrels on the floor. It's just, but I know J&J's, in charge of the manufacturing there now. So here, fingers crossed they can, get stuff righted over there. We can even up our vaccine supply even more.
It's also an interesting contrast just to the calls for the relaxation of IP for these vaccines, with the notion that if you do that, they can be made everywhere and made quickly. I don't know where I stand on whether they should be relaxed or not, but this just demonstrates that you just can't make these things anywhere. These need to be really well-regulated facilities. And the shame is that the site visit wasn't done to this company before we committed more money to their efforts. So
I don't think we should have the start of a homebrew vaccine industry.
Yeah, that's a great craft vaccines. Yes.
It's Kraft, the guy with the punk rock T-shirt, and the blue jeans made it for me in his basement. It's great. It's good stuff.
Yeah, they could have cool names and really cool packaging. So that might be something. That's
great. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, sounds good. We should. It's the new startup space.
Chris, before we get into number 3, I wanted to we're gonna introduce a spin out from the Device Talks weekly podcast. Chris, we have a spin out.
Oh wow. Yeah. You're spinning it out. All right.
Wow. We've had one guests who have been popular enough that they warranted their own show. So we're going to.
Do you have a branded spinner for the Device Talks weekly spin-off?
If people go to devicetalks.com/tacky merch, they can find their Device Talks spinner. That's great. Tacky merch. Yes.
Tacky merch.
Yes. I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do. After we play our break music, you're going to hear the very beginning of our new podcast. You're going to hear the introduction, and you're going to hear a part of the first interview. To hear the rest of the interview, you'll have to go over to Device Talks and find the new podcast, or you'll be able to find it on all of the podcast platforms where you find Device Talks. So let's go. Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi of Device Talks. Welcome to our newest member of the Device Talks podcast family. It's called Medtronic Talks. Our constant search to find new ways to bring you insights in the medtech industry led us to the fine folks at Medtronic. They've agreed to make their senior leaders available to us and to you. In each episode, we'll discuss the opportunities and challenges facing one of medtech's clear leaders, so you'll have an inside view on what makes Medtronic go. We'll ask the questions, Medtronic will provide the answers, and our great network of sponsors makes it all possible. So sit back, hop on a treadmill, take the dog for a walk, whatever you do when you listen to a great podcast, and let's listen to how Medtronic is getting the job done. Let's go. Thanks again for joining us on the Medtronic Talks podcast. Today, we'll focus on Medtronic's respiratory interventions business. This is a discussion brought to you by Propel. Our first guests of this Medtronic's Talk podcast are Ariel McTavish. Ariel is the president of respiratory interventions at Medtronic, and Dr. John DeChapel. He is Vice President and Chief Medical Officer for the Americas at Medtronic. A year ago, Ariel and John were among those leading Medtronic's internal and external responses to the rising COVID-19 pandemic. In this interview, we'll hear what they saw, but more important, what they did to help Medtronic answer the call for ventilators and other critical needs. But first, we'll talk with Chuck Sarin. He is Vice President of Industry Marketing for Medtech and Life Sciences at Propel, a maker of a cloud-based tool to manage product development. Chuck, please tell us more about Propel and what it offers.
Propel is a product success platform that really enables companies to build better, safer, and more effective products and bring those products to market faster. We really do this from concept to customer and cover the entire product lifecycle. And also, we're uniquely a QMS, a PLM, and a PIM, or commercialization solution, all on one platform. So we eliminate what's commonly three disparate systems and eliminate those huge gaps in data leakage and connect these systems, people, processes to reduce the cost of quality. We also enable you to design, make, market, and sell and service your products. So being natively built on Salesforce, we really unify that product quality, service, and customer records for true enterprise collaboration into the sales and service clouds. And then rest assured, being built on the Salesforce platform, we also give you all that security, scalability, analytics, and reporting in a very highly extensible to your processes.
All right, we'll hear more from Chuck Sarin and Propel a little later in the podcast. Now, let's hear from Ariel McTavish and John DeChapel, our first guests on Medtronic Talks. Don DeChapel and Ariel McTavish, welcome to Medtronic Talks.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Thanks, Tom.
So we're about a year removed from when the world shut down, and it was a time when we all found different ways to work, and we can maybe get into that a little later. But one thing that clearly happened immediately was an area of medtech that really maybe didn't get as much attention as it might have in terms of innovation and ideas and just consideration was respiratory and ventilation. I've covered medtech for a long time. I could probably count on one hand how many stories I've written about innovative technologies in ventilators. We've assumed that we're assuming they're going to work. They very rarely get the center stage and get under the spotlight. All of that changed a year ago. And I want to just understand how, if you can recall a year back, sort of how the crisis set upon you and Medtronic broadly, but also the businesses you work in Medtronic. Like, what was the first indication to you that this was going to be a call that you had to answer?
At the very beginning of the year, in January, we definitely were getting signals that from China that they were having this outbreak of this disease, and it required ventilators in the ICU, and that there was an inordinate demand and clinical need there. So the initial phase of it for us was really diverting all of our allocation of ventilators from the normal global customers to China for clinical reasons, and really explaining to all of our existing customers and deals that we needed to allocate the ventilators there. But at that moment, I don't think any of us saw certainly the expansion of that beyond China, which was to come in the coming months. And then, of course, subsequently to that, as the pandemic continued to spread around the globe, we ended up with similar kinds of demands coming from customers all over the world that needed ventilators right away. There was also, like you said, there wasn't so much of an understanding of ventilation. There was a lot of confusion between a respirator and a ventilator, for example. There was definitely a lot of misunderstanding of quantities and what was really required and what degree the crisis would be. So we were working through all of that in, say, the March, April timeframe. And then for our business in particular, it was really in March when not only did we have the shutdown of our facilities and the lockdown of staying home, but right at that same moment, we started to do daily calls with the ventilator technical team combined with our executive leadership team to address these daily kinds of requests and communication that was out there. So yes, reflecting back a year, it was a very intense moment in that March, April timeframe for sure.
And John, I want to get to you in a moment just to talk more about Medtronic, but Ariel, I'm just curious, was it clear early on that this is going to require some extraordinary actions, or did you have any sense of how big the wave was that was coming?
We definitely knew extraordinary action would be required, and we were just, I think, trying to do what we could do. And we very soon centered on the fact that serving as many patients as possible, getting as many ventilators out to patients that needed it was our call to action. And that served us well. We could only do what we could do. We knew there was no way we would be able to serve all the demand as a single company. And that really informed a lot of the work we did. We scaled as rapidly as possible internally with our own manufacturing facilities, but we also worked with partners to try to expand different areas by sharing our ventilation IP, allowing others to manufacture it, giving good advice to others to try to ramp that up, and bringing vents out of service. So we definitely knew it was extraordinary times that we needed to deliver.
And John, you're going to bring two different perspectives of the conversation. Let's first hit upon your role as a physician. You're still practicing, and explain to me how your life changed a year ago in that regard, and then we can understand a bit better how everything impacted Medtronic on a whole. But as a physician, what happened to you?
Yeah, I'm a general surgeon practicing in New York City, principally on the weekends, because Medtronic is my full-time job. And so when I work on the weekends, working here in New York, what I got to see sequentially from each time they came to the hospital was just how bad it was getting. And as you recall, New York, and particularly the hospital that I worked at, was labeled to be the epicenter of the epidemic. And what I saw there was a transformation like I hope I never see again for the rest of my life, where we had to create ICUs where there were no ICUs, whether it was a women's health center or a recovery room, all of a sudden became an ICU. 1, 2, 5, 7 ICUs popped up around the hospital. We had to bring in clinicians from all around the country to help us staff it. We had one ICU was staffed by the Air Force, another one by the Navy. And it got so bad that a general surgeon like myself who does trauma surgery at the hospital had to actually run one of the COVID ICUs, which it's challenging enough if you're not an intensivist to be running an ICU. But these are some of the sickest patients any intensivist would ever manage in their whole career. And then yet we were thrown into it as general surgeons managing these COVID ICUs. And so I got to see it up close, and that really helped inform me for the work that I did for Medtronic in helping guide our company through our crisis response.
And what was your role in guiding and helping to develop that response?
I remember it pretty distinctly, getting a call from a member of our executive committee on January 29th, to be exact, saying, hey, we don't know what we need, but we need you involved in the company's crisis response, and we want you to be the medical leader. So I became the chief medical officer for the company's COVID crisis response team. And that role has evolved not just over those first few weeks, but over the last year. I would characterize the outset of then epidemic as a period of great uncertainty. And we knew that we needed to educate ourselves as fast as possible. So we reached out to experts around the world to teach us so that we could, at the same time, protect our employees while still making the life-saving medical equipment that we need to make for the well-being of patients around the world, whether they're COVID patients, such as Ariel's business with ventilators, or other businesses that supply products that are for urgent procedures, such as cardiac valves and stents and such. So it was a real challenge to balance the two, protecting our 90,000 employees around the world, ensuring their safety, at the same time meeting our commitment to patients by continuing to make life-saving medical devices.
And you have obviously employees on the ground across the world, people in China as well. I'm wondering, did you gain insights from there? How much did you rely upon insights and experiences from Medtronic's global employees in understanding what was going to be hitting your U.S. offices and businesses?
One thing that we did right at the beginning was form what I like to call a private public health service. So we're fortunate at Medtronic to have a lot of doctors and nurses in our employ. And so we created regional medical teams And so our China team, for example, formed very quickly and worked very closely with our commercial leadership to understand how the epidemic was impacting our employees throughout China. We quickly set up a system where we contacted each and every one of our several thousand employees in China twice a week to ask them whether they had symptoms that might suggest that they had COVID. And if they did, then we had one of our doctors on the phone with them to better understand what they were experiencing, how we could get them help, and how we could keep them safe and also keep them isolated from other employees. So we developed this internal public health service. That model really served us well when the disease then started to impact Europe and other geographies around the world.
And Ariel, how did that impact the ventilator business? I have to imagine that you were all on alert that as essential can be. How did you manage that going forward?
Yeah, the work that John and his team did was instrumental in two things. One was the ability to scale up the manufacture. And our ventilators are all manufactured in Ireland, but we have the circuits and filters that are manufactured in Italy, so a hot spot there, as well as in Mexico. So as the pandemic spread to those areas, there was a lot of high risk and a lot of regulations that were put in place, either trying to totally shut things down so that only essential workers could get through, or at least putting some kind of social distancing and other regulations and checks in place. There had to be the ability to immediately respond to the regulations country by country, as well as our government affairs team for Medtronic was front and center as well in coordinating with the governments to allow these essential workers to get to the facilities so that they could actually build the products that were required everywhere. And I think that we all felt, very reassured by the fact that the employee safety was at the heart of everything. And again, the work that John and his team did was very well recognized across the organization. And I think it gave our employees a sense of security that they could go into the workplace and that their right measures would be in place to keep them safe.
I hope you enjoyed that little introduction to our newest podcast in the Device Talks family. Once again, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. You can subscribe to Medtronic Talks there. You can also find it on our Device Talks site. And of course, Medtronic will have it up on their site as well. So welcome to the family, Medtronic Talks. And we look forward to bringing you those conversations. We'll actually send out episode 2 through the Device Talks channel next week. So we'll have a bonus podcast. But once again, I do ask you to subscribe at all the major podcast channels. All right, Chris Newmarker, let's go to number 3 on Newmarker's Newsmakers.
Yeah, number 3 on the list. We're into earnings now. We got Intuitive Surgical. Their stock rose like nearly 10% on Wednesday, a day after they reported first quarter results that like handily beat what Wall Street was expecting. For their first quarter, their bottom line was up more than a third year over year. Their sales were up nearly 18% year over year. Their CEO is cautioning that recovery's uneven as we try to get our way out of this pandemic. He really called it a step in the right direction. So just really good news there. Just some more reason to be really optimistic about about how the medical device industry is going to be performing this year.
It would be very time consuming, but I think very interesting if we went through all of these reports, listed the discrepancy between what Wall Street was expecting and what actually happened, and then comparing it to past years and just seeing if analysts have really any idea of what this recovery is going to look like. I mean, and I'm not criticizing them, but who knows? I mean,
right. Well, we haven't recovered from a pandemic in over 100 years. I mean, there's no one alive. Well, there's a few people alive, but they're like, they're eating applesauce in the in retirement home right now.
Applesauce.
No ragging on applesauce, but it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to be an analyst normally, let alone try to make predictions when you're coming out of something so strange and just unusual we haven't been through. So it'll be interesting to see how the predictions go.
All right, let's roll on to number 2 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list, Chris.
Yeah, number 2 on the list, we've got Medtronic getting FDA approval for their next.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, Medtronic. Yeah, they do some stuff in the device space. So anyway, they have an FDA approval. They've got they've had their Pipeline Flex device that's been on the market in the U.S. for close to 10 years. payors. It's designed to divert blood flow away from a brain aneurysm. But, this next gen version of it that got approval has this shield technology that's like this proprietary materials tech that's supposed to reduce the tendency of the material surface treatment to create blood clots. So very cool, because that's always been like something that's been associated with cardio devices. People have to take blood thinners if they're on some devices. So just to have something here that could reduce those challenges sounds like good news.
Great stuff. Great Medtech news. All right, Chris, bring it home. What's number one on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list?
Number one on the list, IPO.
Woohoo!
We've got NeuroPace's IPO. Yeah, out of the gate on Thursday. Their stock just skyrocketed. They upsized what they were looking to get out of it. The total gross proceeds they're going after yesterday was $102 million. And this is a neurostim. It's touted their RNS system is touted as the world's only closed loop brain responsive neurostimulation system designed to prevent epileptic seizures at their source.
Oh, that's great. And this, I'll be honest, Chris, I think NeuroPace probably is my first MedTech crush. Like when I started covering the sector, and you heard of a device, and it made you go, "That's so cool." I think NeuroPace's ability to not only sense but also treat epileptic seizures. I mean, this is just classic.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a condition that's really detrimental to people's lives, and you're creating a device to help them. It's like that was the first time one of the first times I really became enamored and excited about the sector, that the fact that we're using technology for this, and this was during the late 90s. So to everyone else, technology was ordering more cat food online or wherever the hell it was back then, or Amazon was coming around. And this was technology being used for the right reason.
Coolcatphotos.com,
Exactly.
And you're like, wait, they're like bringing electricity to the brain to treat epilepsy. That's
cool.
It's really cool.
Coolcatphotos.com probably went public in 1999 and was able to stage an IPO 3 months after its founding. So as we can see, NeuroPace and Medtech takes a little longer, but the work they do is fantastic. And great list, Chris. And congratulations in all seriousness to the folks at NeuroPace. I know Frank Fisher's not CEO anymore, but Mike Fave is, and he's great. And it's a great company, and really happy that they found their way onto the public markets, and look forward to more exciting product news from them in the future. All right, well, now let's hear from Mike Coyle, the CEO of iRhythm. Well, Mike Coyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great to hear iRhythm's story. You've got a lot of news to discuss, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And I really do want to learn a lot more about your offerings going forward. But we always start these conversations with learning a little bit about the guest. How did you find your way, Mike, into the MedTech industry?
Well, I'm an engineer by training.
Oh.
I kind of graduated as a chemical engineer and actually started life with a pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly, doing development of manufacturing processes for them. And by a strange happenstance, I was invited to go work with their toxicology division to do instrumentation of animal models to look at real-time cardiovascular effects of drugs. And as a result, kind of fell in love with Medtech, even before it was Medtech. So now I wound up coming back into their medical device division, and I've really spent the last 25, 30 years in cardiovascular devices.
How did you then find your way into to Medtronic?
So actually, as I mentioned, I have really been in the cardiovascular device side of the business for a long time, first with Eli Lilly. And then I actually went to St. Jude Medical when it was just a $200 million company and a heart valve company. And of course, was involved with a lot of the acquisition work that got them into cardiac rhythm and atrial fibrillation and other areas. Wound up running two of their businesses, one in AF management. The other one was their cardiac rhythm business, pacemakers, implantable defibrillators, cardiac resynchronization devices. And wound up taking a little bit of a leave of absence in the late 2007-8 kind of time frame, and then tried some private equity, but I found it not quite as operationally exciting as what I was used to. So went to Medtronic when they put together their cardiovascular device businesses, and I ran that essentially $11 billion business for them over about an 11-year period.
That's right. That's right. I have it right here in my notes about St. Jude. I missed that. I didn't realize though about the private equity little hiatus there. So yeah, I would think it's a different, more of a moving of numbers and dollars and less of rolling your sleeves up and getting things done.
Yeah, couldn't get rid of the engineer in me, so I'm gonna have to just embrace it.
Had you always had eyes and desire to be a CEO? Was that part of your long-term plan?
Sure, I had always had as a sort of a long-term objective the opportunity to actually lead a fully integrated business that had its own P&L and was publicly traded. So obviously had a good opportunity across both St. Jude and Medtronic to run fully integrated businesses. Mm-hmm. But this is my first opportunity to actually be a public company CEO.
And how did that come about? And what was it about the iRhythm opportunity that was appealing?
Well, it's interesting. I have, as I said, spent most of my life doing therapeutic devices in cardiovascular. And of course, all of that begins with the appropriate identification of a patient who needs to be treated. That's right. And I've always felt that, Holter technology, event recorder technology was, 30, 40, 50-year-old technology and was due to be disrupted. And so I've been watching iRhythm from afar, mostly because I was really intrigued with their application of machine learned to deep learned algorithms to the application of doing electrocardiogram analysis. And, when the opportunity came that, Kevin King, who had built up the company, was going to be leaving, it seemed retiring. It seemed like a really good opportunity for me to come into a business that I saw as having multiple growth vectors, continued, sort of penetration of the Holter monitor market here in the United States. Mm-hmm. Absolute green field for growth of this technology outside the United States. And one of the more exciting things to me is there's right now we principally focus on symptomatic arrhythmia patients, but there is a huge opportunity, especially in the identification of atrial fibrillation in asymptomatic patients, that I think the iRhythm technology is particularly well suited to. So those are all kind of growth vectors that I'm interested in building on. And I actually think the core technology the company has in advanced AI applications to biometrics can be applied to a lot of areas beyond simply the analysis of electrocardiograms for arrhythmias into things like sleep apnea or heart failure. And over time, it'd be great to take the company in those directions.
Tell us a bit about how the device works and what it does. Quick rundown for our listeners.
Sure. So the technology is a patch technology that basically is worn by the patient for 14 days. Mm-hmm. It continuously records the electrocardiogram signal, and and of course the key is you got to be able to shower and do your normal life with it on, which is the benefit of the Zio technology. And then the patient mails it in to our intake centers, where we apply the advanced AI algorithms to actually look at that 20,000 minutes of electrocardiogram information to look for those needles in the haystack, right? The arrhythmias that are there. And essentially 13 different types of arrhythmias are identified through the AI application. They are confirmed by a very large team of certified cardiac technicians we have here on staff. And a report is generated for the physician. So that basically steers them to treatable arrhythmias, and then the physician can very easily integrate that information into their EHR, where have it on their phone to be able to then do the diagnosis and treat the patient.
How much more data is the physician getting from Zio than from the more traditional standards?
Sure. Well, a typical Holter monitor is worn for up to 48 hours, but frankly, it's mostly 24 hours because mm-hmm. patients don't like wearing them. So the amount of information that we are collecting in that 14-day period is at least 14 times what would typically be seen in a Holter monitor. And of course, that becomes the challenge of being able to efficiently analyze that amount of data and look for these arrhythmias. But what we found is many patients don't exhibit those arrhythmias in that first 24-hour period. And that oftentimes they have multiple arrhythmias that actually show up over the course of that time period. So mm-hmm. The typical patient, who gets a Holter will only have about a 24% yield on correct diagnosis in that first 24 hours. Whereas when you wear it 14 days in a Zio system and you overlay our advanced AI technologies, about 97% of the patients will have a confirmed diagnosis of either an existing arrhythmia or confirm that the symptoms they're feeling are not caused by heart conditions.
I wonder how you viewed iRhythm when you were at Medtronic, as a complement or as not a competitor, but how did their offerings and their service fit into what you were doing there? And I wonder if there are any surprises on the technology when you moved over to iRhythm. What did you learn that perhaps you didn't see when you were at another company looking from the outside?
Sure. Well, I think, the most important thing is, everything starts for the cardiac rhythm businesses of Medtronic or a Boston Scientific or an Abbott or even a J&J's, ablation business, identification of a patient who needs to be treated. Mm-hmm. And so looking for slow heart rates, looking for fast heart rates, looking for atrial fibrillation is important to being able to identify patients who then can get a pacemaker or an implantable defibrillator or an ablation procedure. So this is really the start of all of that. What I think is the most interesting thing about the technology, though, is that by actually looking carefully using AI techniques, there's a lot more information in the data that those companies already have in their pacemakers and ICDs that they could be looking for. And applications of this approach, I think, can be used in other parts of medicine.
Interesting. So iRhythm has been one of the high-flying companies in digital health that went public in 2016. Was really one of the leaders in the space, kind of building. It was one of the first so-called digital health companies, although it's more than that, to really produce and get on the public markets and demonstrate that these ideas could become big businesses. What has occurred since you join the company? First of all, what's it like to take over for a founding CEO like Kevin, who sort of built this company? What's it like to come in? Do you operate as someone who's going to be carrying what had happened forward, or do you obviously you come in with ideas of your own, but what do you do as a new CEO to sort of make your own mark on a company like this? Well,
I think it's important to really understand that the team that worked with Kevin, that Kevin assembled to do this, build this company, is very much the one that's operating the company today, and sure. that those folks have really a deep understanding of the service itself and the technology itself. And my role is sort of to come in, I think, and really talk about what happens at the next level. Mm-hmm. We talked about, full, market adoption of the service as a replacement for essentially a technique in Holter monitors that's much more limited in what it can do. And of course, global expansion of that is an important piece that I have a lot of experience with from my days with Medtronic in particular. That can be very helpful to a company that's really a U.S. based organization. But then the other piece, that is really key to the long-term growth of the company is this idea of being able to generate the clinical and economic evidence to be able to start to penetrate the asymptomatic atrial fibrillation population, where patients are at really elevated risk for very bad outcomes like strokes and heart failure decompensation, but they don't know it because they don't have the technology, and so or they don't have the diagnosis. And so it's important for us as an organization to really develop the rigorous clinical and economic evidence to drive that market adoption, and to be able to speak to payers and to payer provider systems about not just the benefits of the clinical identification of these arrhythmias, but that patients actually have greater satisfaction. They'd rather wear a Zio patch for 14 days than wear a Holter monitor for 24 hours. And even more importantly, that it lowers the overall costs to their healthcare system because patients are not coming back in for repeat testing. They're not having missed diagnoses that then result in emergency room visits. And working with the claims data of these patients, we're able to show that cost effectiveness. And that's something I have a lot of experience with from my days at Medtronic. So bringing those perspectives to a really high-performing team that already existed here is really what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, that's one of the challenges with the medical device industry, of course, is you can have all the greatest technology and the demand for a product, but so much of these companies' success and your success depends upon reimbursement, and you've been facing some strong headwinds there. Talk a little bit about the last couple of months. I mean, you came on board, and suddenly there was some changes to Medicare policy. Bring us up to speed on what has happened to the coverage of iRhythm, and I'd love to learn some of the maneuvers you're making to move forward.
Sure. Well, first, it's important to recognize a lot of the dynamics, all of the dynamics we're really talking about here are occurring on the Medicare side of the business.
Sure.
So this is, about 25% of our total revenue is associated with Medicare applications of the Zio XT product. Mm-hmm. So we've had very, stable performance in the commercial operation. So the private pay side of our business, who really, have seen the benefits of the technology in terms of driving efficiency in their client hospitals in getting better outcomes for their patients. And so we've had very good, sort of stable pricing, frankly, above Medicare pricing in the commercial sector of our business for many years. Mm-hmm. What's new is that last year there was an approval of new permanent codes, CPT-1 codes, for this test, the 3 to 7 day and 7 to 14 day use of the Zio technology to identify arrhythmias. And with the establishment of those codes, the old temporary pricing went away. And when those codes were established as of January 1, new pricing had to be established. But it's interesting when you think about a monitor for 3 days versus one for 14 days, you get very different requirements, right? There are relatively simple approaches where you could use a patch with Holter software to actually generate a report for a 3-day test. Which obviously has much lower cost associated with it, but it has much lower information content in terms of the arrhythmias. Mm-hmm. But that same code is going to be applied to any technology, whether it's our advanced technology or something more simple. And so getting those codes established with single pricing has been challenging because obviously the MACs, the Medicare providers in the regions are looking at essentially trying to drive the most efficient cost structure they can for these tests. But it gets complicated by the fact that there's only one code and there are multiple technologies that can be brought to bear. Mm-hmm. So we saw the prevailing pricing of about $300 that had been in the Medicare system for many years drop down with the announcements a week and a half ago from Novitas to be down around $120 or $115, let's say, for that code. So that is challenging for us because it's actually below the cost that we have to process a 14-day electrocardiogram. And so we are working with Novitas, we're working with other MACs, and we're working with CMS to see if we can get the methodologies that are being applied here to be a little more clear about the costs and the benefits that we have with our system. So we've got work to do on our Medicare payments, but we're going to continue to service our customers while we work that through, even though it's below our cost, because we think long-term we can convince Medicare that it's in their best interest to actually have this service available.
How hard-baked was the $300 amount in your business plan going forward, in your projections going forward? Were you counting on that being maintained, or were you anticipating that once these adjustments went through that there'd be a cut? And is the cut just larger than you thought it would be?
Yeah, we thought we'd have stable pricing because mm-hmm. that pricing had actually been established back in 2012 when the functionality of the system was considerably less than what it is today. So we thought while there's, of course, always, a look at pricing and pricing pressure, the enhanced functionality of the system, we thought actually justified a higher price. And in fact, that is what was presented to CMS last year in what's called the RUC AMA process, where they actually were ascribing a value in the low 400s for the service based on that enhanced functionality that we were talking about. So it is a bit of a surprise, a big surprise to see the pricing established as low as it was in the Novitas decision. But mm-hmm. as I said, we're going back to them with additional data. We're also pursuing the national pricing for these codes with CMS, and we've presented them in mid-March with some new methodologies that we think can be helpful in actually ascribing value to the advanced AI technology, which isn't valued in the approaches that are used down at the MACs. So if we are able to do that, we think we can get that pricing to be much more representative of our true costs to go in to provide the service, but then, allow us to actually get the overall cost benefits to the system by having it reasonably priced.
How are you treating the fee-for-service Medicare patients going forward? I've seen some analysts say that you weren't going to service that population anymore, but then I saw you issued a statement saying you would. What are you doing there going forward?
So basically, obviously, you can imagine the concern of having the established pricing be below our costs, that it's not exactly a long-term sustainable proposition to be able to service the Medicare patients at that cost level. That being said, we think we have plenty of time, given the strength of the financial position of the company, our strong balance sheet, and the fact that even though it will take time, we believe our data support a higher cost point or price point. So given the fact that most of our business is in the commercial and the client bill or payer provider direct payment parts of our model, and those are not directly impacted by the Medicare pricing. Mm-hmm. We think we have plenty of time to work through with our customer base, or with the reimbursement authorities, how to get reasonable pricing into the Medicare segment, and so we're going to continue to service them while we do that work in parallel.
Is there a concern that the Medicare move is a sort of a leading indicator for private payers, that they may follow their example and do the same?
Well, certainly, the private payers are going to be looking at that established pricing, and one of the reasons we were clear about it being below our cost was to make it clear that it's not a price point we can service permanently. Mm-hmm. In that if we can't get it addressed. But the nice thing we found about our interactions with the commercial payers is that they're very interested in the total cost to serve. What the total impact on their costs are of having a technology that maybe a little more expensive upfront than things like Holter monitors, but actually drives better utilization of resources by not having a bunch of repeat testing, not having a bunch of inappropriate hospitalizations for ER visits because diagnoses were missed, and so we find them very receptive to the data that we show about the high diagnostic yield that they get with the technology, mm-hmm. and how that results in not only better patient outcomes but lower overall costs to their system.
How does having players like Boston Scientific moving into the sector, getting a real critical mass of other companies that are looking to provide this service, how does that affect your argument? I would imagine that if there's more people providing this service, then it's a validation of sorts. Obviously they're competitors for the same business, but there is a demonstration that there's a lot of value here if many companies going after it. How does the landscape sort of help your planning going forward?
Well, I think it truly is validation of the importance of the segment, right? Yeah. I mean, I think a Boston Scientific has an interest not just in sort of the businesses of Preventus as they exist today, but in driving appropriate diagnosis of patients with things like atrial fibrillation and heart block, because they have therapeutic devices that actually will service those markets. So by actually getting a much more efficient identification of patients, they as I would view it, are counting on the fact that there'll be much more appropriate therapy for patients. So we view it as a huge validation of the opportunity in the segment, and why traditional Holter monitoring should be a much smaller part of the market than it has been historically. And obviously, we welcome others joining us in that messaging, because sure. Our biggest competitor here is the inertia of older Holter technology and not recognizing what's being left on the table from the patient's perspective by not using more advanced AI-enabled approaches.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, just looking forward, is this a situation that you grow yourself out of by just getting to more and more patients and letting them know that this technology is there? And how do you do that? I mean, just this conversation for me, it leaves it a no-brainer as to how, if I ever had to deal with this issue, which product I would want to use. I'd obviously want to use yours.
Well, it's certainly, this technology is much more patient friendly, as I said, and much more effective at getting it to a definitive diagnosis. So. Mm-hmm. I do think that is something that we're going to continue to sort of focus on and validate. And it's interesting, when we did the announcement a week and a half ago of the Novitas rate and its impact on our business, we also pre-announced our Q1 sort of unit performance benefits, and actually saw a 9% growth in Q1 over Q4 of utilization of the service. So there is tremendous physician and patient interest in the technology, and we're still 20% ish penetrated into the U.S. arrhythmia detection market. So there's plenty of growth. It's really just a question of making sure we get appropriate payment for the technology.
And how do you pursue the asymptomatic market? I mean, if someone's asymptomatic, they don't know they have this issue. I mean, this isn't something that they'd wear on an Apple Watch or something and they're just tracking all the time, is it? I mean, how do you approach that market?
So there's a very well-established approach to looking at clinical parameters to indicate a patient's risk of developing atrial fibrillation. It's called the CHADS-VASc score. And what it is if you have certain conditions, hypertension, if you're above a certain age, if you've had a prior stroke, you get a score. And basically what we have done in conjunction with actually pharmaceutical partners is to identify patients who don't have frank arrhythmias, don't have a diagnosed arrhythmia, but have higher CHADS-VASc scores. And then prophylactically use the screening technology of the Zio XT service to see if they actually had atrial fibrillation events. And as it turned out, in the what's called mSToP study that we did, about 5% of the patients who have these elevated scores are actually in atrial fibrillation, and they don't know it. And if you didn't use the patch, then only about 0.5% of those patients would get diagnosed. And the reason that's important is because if you know they have atrial fibrillation, you can put them on oral anticoagulation medications and lower their stroke risk by 80%. And so we've now shown 3-year data that showed a significant improvement in very hard outcomes like rehospitalization and bleed rates from patients who actually were screened using the Zio XT technology. So that's going to be our model kind of going forward. We're partnering with pharma companies to create much larger data sets so that we can impact guidelines and maybe even more importantly, sit down with payers and payer provider systems and show them that they can lower improve outcomes and lower overall costs of very expensive events like strokes by doing prophylactic screening using the technology.
Oh, that's a great point. Anyone responsible for patient costs would have to be listening to that. You mentioned partners. You had a partnership with Verily or have one. Can you just speak a bit about the product that may be coming out in connection with that?
Sure. Well, obviously, that's a partnership that is still in its relatively early stages of being able to clinically and evaluate the opportunity here. But the thought process is that we've demonstrated just with the Zio technology that duration of monitoring can really help improve your diagnostic yield. And the concept here is if wearing a patch on the chest for 2 weeks is helpful in terms of really driving much better identification of arrhythmias, can we identify patients at elevated risk for atrial fibrillation by actually having a wrist-borne sensor that is the equivalent of a watch, but that is using advanced AI technology to actually screen the signals coming off of the watch. And so we've partnered with Verily to develop a prototype, and we are going to use that technology once it is FDA approved to actually do screening in real patients, clinical testing, to see if we have a sufficiently sensitive and specific indicator of atrial fibrillation that we could either put them on a Zio patch if they had certain indicators to confirm the presence of the arrhythmia, or even move right to therapy if it's sufficiently specific, right? So that work is ongoing and an exciting potential future development for the company.
Final question directed more to you and your move from Medtronic, a larger company with lots of different products, to iRhythm, a really focused company with a single large platform. I wonder what has been the experience being a CEO at a company that had received a seismic change in payment, or at least a considerable change in how revenue could come in. How do you sort of cope with that sort of situation? I would almost call it a crisis. Is it a crisis management situation? Is it just allowing people the time to sort of absorb what happened and find a new way forward? What have the past 4 months been like for you?
Well, again, a bit of a surprise given that the data were really posted in about my second week, third week in the company. So being able to see the challenge that was going to be coming in the Medicare reimbursement segment via the Novitas was a bit of a surprise. But as I said, the underlying appeal of the service and the fact that we have commercial payers who are recognizing the value and helping support us as we kind of, buy the time, if you will, to actually have these substantive discussions with Medicare, CMS, to actually get established pricing that it's in an acceptable range. I think we have time to actually do this because the company's well capitalized. We were essentially at break even before this change. We can absorb this and work with the payers to actually get appropriate reimbursement. And most importantly, we continue to have the validation of the clinical evidence that shows it's just a better approach for the whole quadruple aim. Better for patients, better for patient flow through the hospital system. It's better for clinical outcomes, and of course, it lowers the overall cost of care. So those things are working in our favor. So we'll turn those into advantage.
Great. Lots of work for the engineer in you to get done for sure. Excellent, Mike. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you answering the questions and appearing on the podcast. It's great to have you.
All right. Well, I appreciate the invitation, and we'll look forward to another visit sometime in the future.
All right, Chris Newmarker, it's wrap time. What do we like to tell folks at this point in the podcast?
I am on social media.
Yay!
I am with it. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker. I'm on Twitter at Newmarker. Always open to new ideas, new pitches, feedback on how we're doing. So reach out to me.
And I am on Twitter at Medtech Tom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. And Chris, you're going to laugh, but I almost wasn't going to mention our intention to gather on Clubhouse at 1 p.m. on Wednesdays because we haven't done it the last couple of weeks. But I got an email this morning from Megan Ziemba, who was on with us a few weeks ago, and she's been in contact with someone she met on our Clubhouse. And that person is asking, why haven't they had another Clubhouse session? So, Chris, the people...
Wow, we're missed.
The people demand Clubhouse. So
right.
I'll make a little effort to try to get something together for next week, 1 p.m. Eastern on Clubhouse, and we'll have a few guests lined up. So,
are you going to dust out our Clubhouse, or should I?
We've got we'll get the Robot Report guys to send one of their robot Roombas there, and maybe they can clean it up.
Oh, I love it. That sounds great. Yeah, clean Clubhouse. Get it all done.
Tidy,
great.
Tidy. So yes, so we'll clean out that Clubhouse, and we'll try to get folks virtually together again.
Get that set of Magic Treehouse books, like set in order, because it'll be good.
Sounds great.
Times. Yeah.
All right, Chris Newmarker, great job today. Thank you, folks, for joining us on this podcast. Please do subscribe to this podcast, and please do subscribe to the Medtronic Talks podcast. As I mentioned earlier, we will be releasing the first two episodes are available on SoundCloud. I'll send out the second episode through Device Talks next week, so you'll have a little bit of extra podcast fun. You can listen to that as well. But the best way to keep tabs on what's going on with Medtronic Talks is to subscribe. So subscribe to Medtronic Talks on all of your podcast players. And of course, I know you've already subscribed to Device Talks Weekly, but if you've let that one slip, please do subscribe to that also. And in the case of both podcasts, please share it. Tell your friends and colleagues, and connect to Chris and I.
Follow, subscribe.
There it is. That's right.
There we go, man.
We have to get a T-shirt with that saying.
Follow,
on devicetalks.com/tacky merch. So we'll get a T-shirt going. I think we got something going on. Get the spinners, get the T-shirts.
No homebrew vaccine kits. Not doing it. Nope.
I think that might require some regulation, and I don't want to get involved with that.
Do not want to get involved with the federal court system. Let's stay away from that. Yeah.
Stay away from that.
All right.
All right, folks. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talk Weekly Podcast waiting for you.
Hey, take care and get vaccinated soon.